Our first speaker of the afternoon is Steve Herrod, who is the Chief Technology Officer of VMware. And in that position, he is a leader in VMware's technology collaborations with customers and partners. You've probably chatted, many of you have probably chatted with him this morning. Steve was named as CTO of the Year by Computerworld's sister publication, InfoWorld, in 2009. Please welcome Steve Herrod. Short enough?
Hi, good afternoon. Sorry, a little loud. So this is my first time at this event, and I appreciate your coming in here. I was just talking with Julia. The thing I've liked seeing is that it seems very much of a peer environment where you're sharing notes and talking about common pain. And I was just saying that as I realized I'm getting up to do the vendor pitch. But I do get to spend a lot of my time, as I said, collaborating with customers, and that's what I enjoy the most. I've gotten to meet several of you, and what I thought I'd do is just step back a little bit, try and share what we see going on, and give some opinions on where the world's going. And then if we have a little time at the end, we'll answer a few questions. So the thing that's really interesting right now is that there are a lot of obvious transformations going on. A lot of them are hitting us in our consumer life, and in turn, that is causing the next generation of employees to have expectations upon their own IT departments as they come into them. And I was thinking about it, we've had a lot of big changes going on in technology all along, but what's really interesting for me is that two types of transformation are happening at the same time. Certainly one is in the data center side of things, where we are now recognizing that there are cloud computing opportunities out there, things that can be more efficient than they might have traditionally been, and give you a lot more power than you might have had. But at the exact same time, we're seeing a big transformation in how we're interacting with our own systems as we go forward. So we have a combination of an existing infrastructure of many years of built-up inventory in place, and we have new expectations where the notion of a desktop computer really doesn't even make sense anymore. And so at the same time, a lot of the IT departments are being called upon to transform the way that they work with their infrastructure, lower the costs, be more responsive to the business. But they're also having to deal with new devices and people expecting to do whatever they want, wherever they want, and whatever device they happen to have. So I think having those two things hitting at the same time from a technology standpoint is obviously very daunting for many of you in the audience. But what's also interesting is the expectations that are happening here. And I have to apologize, I really like clip art, so I went a little crazy here. But at the same time that technology changes are hitting IT departments, the expectations and how business units are working with IT are changing pretty dramatically. So this person represents a business unit that has very intense needs to get their product out the door and to market them. And in the good old days, IT was on the side, and IT owned all of the infrastructure and was the place that you went for doing whatever you happened to be. But if you think about it, while money used to go strictly to your own IT department, and not just money, but certainly attention and the ability to do anything, it's sort of been the arrival of these great things on the side that have caused people to look another direction. So it's the idea that I now could use my IT department, but hey, I hear there's some public cloud that's out there, and I could just go put my own credit card in there and put money towards that. Or I could actually go and use some sort of special way of writing applications, some platform as a service. Or I could just skip the whole thing and I could actually go and I could start getting a CRM system online instead of going through IT. Or even if I go to the device side, I as an individual at a company, it used to be that I would show up at work and I'd get offered a work-approved laptop or phone. But now, of course, everyone's talking about the notion of bringing your own device to work and wanting to use it there. So I see these as all these lures that are coming to the outside that are legitimate things that you want to do. You want to move faster and get the job done. But what I really see the world shifting towards is the changing role of IT and the changing role of the CIO in many cases, which it shouldn't be about, I only build it and you can only get it here. It's really pushing IT to be more in the role of a broker, and in many ways becoming more like a service provider directly. You want to be the one who certainly can offer things directly in your own data centers, but there might be cases too where you want to be a broker to outside services that make a lot more sense. And what's nice is you can give them to them, but as opposed to the way that these are often happening right now, you still have to be responsible for compliance and security and a lot of the things that keep many of you up at night. So for me, just stepping back and saying, not only do we have this huge set of technology changes, but we have our own business units and our own internal customers who are asking us to behave differently. And those hitting at once really cause you to have a peer group that you can spend time really talking about what you can do together to get past this. So I want to spend a little time on this and really talk about this notion of IT as a service, or IT becoming much more like a broker or a service provider, and some of the technology and organizational changes that come along with that type of shift. So I'm going to start with the trickier area, and also one that all of us can appreciate in our own right. And this is really thinking about the end user computing space, as we call it, or really just how all of us interact with the applications and the data that we use to get our jobs done. And again, the good old days were kind of nice. It used to be that you had a desktop computer, and actually the desktop metaphor held. You would put it at a place. That was the only place that you would interact. And something a little bit less obvious, I only realized this recently, is that Windows Desktop was being used certainly as a place to launch your applications, but this became the perfect place to put permissions and controls around, and still is a great place for doing that. But what's happened now is that you're using more than just that Windows Desktop, of course, and there's a lot of different applications coming into the enterprise. Certainly the arrival as software as a service has been one of the well-published and well-covered aspects of this. Why build something myself when it doesn't differentiate the company? If someone else has it just running and I can just turn it on and off, that's a very compelling way. But this doesn't sit on your desktop. Your data is somewhere else. Permissions might be different, so it becomes a challenge. The other thing going on, of course, is enterprise applications, and increasingly, especially over the next couple of years, the number of enterprise applications that are designed for someone in the field, for instance, so that they can get their work done. And those are mobile applications that have yet another set of unproven approaches to managing them and keeping them in place. And then behind all of this is obviously the data itself, which is, of course, what's responsible for getting your security in place and having your compliance be approved. Knowing how to deal with data, especially in a world where you now have these different types of applications, become hard. And of course, you're now mixing this with the other side of the coin, which is you're not just accessing from one point. Of course, we all know that you're accessing it from your Windows desktop, but also from browsers, from mobile devices, phones, and tablets. So the way we're really seeing this is you could move from the one person, one desktop, one set of apps and data, to really two types of heterogeneity on each side. And we really see the industry moving forward towards some sort of broker system in the middle. And this seems fairly intuitive. You need to have some way to introduce employees to the different applications and services that IT has. And just as importantly, this needs to be the place where you can have a common way of enforcing access controls. Who can get access to what? And so if you think about it, if we do this right, you can actually have something that wins for the employee and that wins for IT department. To employee, I now have the ability to take whatever device wherever I am and within the restrictions of the company, just get what I need to do the job done. And it's not often that this user freedom and choice comes with an ability for IT to get more controls in place. And so the early technologies are around how can I have audit logs and how can I use common passwords and such for all of these things that are in the middle. So depending on a lot of different circumstances, this will begin to roll out in different companies. But I do think you have to think about how to combine user freedom with IT control, which is actually the age-old dilemma that we've been dealing with. So of course, VMware does a number of things in this place, a number of other technology vendors do, but I want to give you a quick taste of a couple of the ways that you could imagine starting to broker from one side to the other, and hopefully get you thinking about how you might roll out the ones that make the most sense in your own environments. So the most obvious thing, and something that has been well proven through Citrix, VMware, and others, is how do I deliver Windows to different places? And this has been very fun to watch, especially as networks have continued to improve, but also as the graphics capabilities and interesting technologies are becoming more and more prevalent. We've been really getting a lot of interesting feedback on a way to bring new devices into the industry, bring them into your company, but no one's going to be able to get rid of all of their Windows apps for sure. So a lot of interesting technologies, again, from VMware and others, are about how do I deliver a Windows application over the network to one of these devices. Now, two big reasons to do this. The first is to centralize data. And everyone knows that having data out on individual endpoints has often been a challenge. And being able to bring that into the data center makes things certainly a little bit more controllable, easier to back up and do disaster recovery for. But for me as a user, I'm one of these people with multiple devices. I literally can now use the device that I have in hand at the right time and get exactly to my own personalized environment and get access to things. I look at a lot of different verticals when I'm meeting with customers. I've particularly enjoyed, as you'll hear in a minute, how this is taking off and really changing healthcare. So we'll talk about that in just a moment. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about is really thinking about data, which is that bottom corner here. And I have been going out to a number of your employee meetings of different sorts and asking how many people were using Dropbox today. And maybe I'll do that here real quickly if you want to raise your hand. How many are using Dropbox somehow? People are often hesitant to raise their hands sometimes, because I often then follow up by just saying, how many are you are allowed to be using Dropbox by your company? And almost every hand tends to go down. And it's not that there's one thing bad or good. The issue is that there is such a convenience factor that's coming around the ability to have your data with you on whatever device you happen to be on, that it is the reason people often go around IT to get to these services. But of course, there are challenges not just with that, but with any of these services where there is no more control over the access to there. So we've also been trying to think about this challenge again, as other vendors have, and we're working on something that we've been trying to take what's great about a file sync and share service, but also bring in some of the things that you need on the enterprise side of the business. So if you haven't used these before, basically think of it as a file system that follows you wherever you go. If you took a picture, if you write an application in one place, it'll magically show up on all your other authorized devices. What we're trying to do is take the two challenges with that we hear the most feedback from customers on. One is I'd like it to have a way to deploy behind my own firewall, to run in my own data center, so that data is kept locally and I know where it is. So one thing that we're looking to do is have that being run as either a public service or something you could deploy locally. And the other part is just something that I think is something the enterprise has really gotten to know for a long time that the consumer business doesn't have to be in quite as much, which is a lot of rich controls over how you share and how data gets moved forward. So the canonical example from a lot of customers is if an employee leaves a company, it shouldn't be that their account follows them. They shouldn't have access to corporate resources at that point. Or likewise, you often have a project going on where you have some of your vendors who are collaborating. You'd like that access to go away after that collaboration time has gone by. So this is another example about how we can take some of the benefits of a consumer type of service and then bring it in with some of the enterprise controls that people are after. And then the last area I just wanted to talk about is what's also on everyone's mind, which is really thinking about mobile devices. And Mobile World Congress was in Barcelona last week. A lot of different solutions and approaches people are looking at. We took an interesting approach to this, which was starting with virtualization, which we see as obviously a very interesting technology for a bunch of fronts. But just to get your mind thinking, one thing that we've just launched is the ability to take one physical device and allow two full phones to exist on it. So a lot of people are talking about bring your own device. The unique angle here is that you bring your device to work, and over the airwaves, a complete work phone is pushed down to it. So it is a complete Android-compatible stack with telephone, data, and the applications that the work has actually chosen to put on there. So again, I think this is one of many approaches that will come in, but the idea is how can I have my device and my convenience, but still allow corporate IT to have control over what's going on in there. So you'll see this start to roll out in a little bit. I have to say it's very neat when you see these two worlds come together and you start getting to interesting questions like if I'm friends with someone at work, what phone book do I put them in? That's something I've been seeing lately. But think about really as wanting to have a set of solutions where you can have different levels of control across them. And if you go back to the original picture around this broker, think of IT as needing to put the policies in place that are going to match up, again, a person and all their different devices and access locations with all of the sources of applications and that critical data that's behind it all. Now, the other thing I've been thinking about a lot is that we are all about these great user experiences, and everyone's trying to make the applications work better and make you access them in a more effective way. But behind any of these great user experiences, especially on mobile devices, has to be the data center that we've been building on so long. So you really have to focus not just on the device where the data goes, but how it's getting there. Now, this is an area that obviously VMware has been focused on for a long time, and this is the core of the work we've been doing for 14 years now. What we've really been finding is that you have to start with a more consumable approach to doing this. And again, I've met with several of you in the past and know many of you are on a journey here as you go forward with this. I just want to give you a quick flavor for how we see the data center playing out and how you might move it into a couple of consumable steps as you go there. So obviously from VMware, we started with virtualization, and virtualization was a very easy way to get started. Most of you have done some form of server consolidation project. But what happens pretty close after you've done a consolidation project is recognizing that a lot of other benefits follow from separating applications from that underlying hardware, which is the core of what virtualization does. You pretty quickly realize that it allows you to provision servers more quickly than in the past, because it's effectively just a file that you're copying. Soon you realize that you can put disaster recovery in place because you've now severed ties between software and hardware and can ship it to another data center more easily. And other things like availability of the applications themselves have gone out. So we see this step go very, very maturely from doing something for server consolidation to recognizing that it helps you move a little bit faster. Well, the next wave that people are talking about is really around how do you start with this and move towards more of this cloud computing model. And you all are probably as tired of hearing about cloud computing as I am in a number of fronts. And when I get asked about it all the time, I really think about it as having a couple of core tenets, the main ones being I help people move faster. I help my business units move faster. And that might manifest itself as letting people provision things more quickly than when they've had to wait weeks for them. Or it might manifest as being able to spill over into other resources, being able to handle demands and peaks a little bit more quickly. But all of this is really among building upon a base so that you can ultimately be a more agile business. And I think that's why people are looking at cloud computing so much, is that the whole core notion of this conference is how can the business get better by IT moving and transforming more effectively. And so when we're going out and talking with customers, they want to start with this ability to make some progress as they get going, and then they want to move into some sort of cloud infrastructure that they can offer internally. The other thing I've been very excited about, though, is recognizing that it's not going to be just one world where there's either a giant public cloud in the sky that everyone uses, and nor will it be that you're only behind your own firewall. I think a lot of companies of 1,000 people or more will have split resources of different sorts. So the other big thing we've been doing over the last year and a half or so is working with a pretty large set of telecommunication providers, system integrators, and other companies that want to offer up services of different sorts back into the enterprise. And what we've enjoyed doing here is using our same software stack when we sell and when we offer these up as services from these partners back into the enterprise. And that has two real values that we've been seeing over and over again. The first is that the scale of some of these offerings is substantially higher than you could imagine a lot of private companies would have. So it's forcing us to do a lot of automation that we might not have otherwise done, which in turn helps the product. But more importantly, for the customers, it really is saying, I can actually have you have some flexibility to move some workloads in and out. And I always laugh when I do this animation because no one's ever going to go back and forth like this. But whether it's a scheduled time as you get to the end of a quarter or into a holiday season, or whether it's that you've actually had one contract with one vendor end up and you found another deal somewhere else, this ability to be more quickly moving between sites is something that we think is fairly core to giving you the ability to do the best for what you need at any given time. And then the other part here is just around security, and you can't even talk about cloud computing without the notion of security coming up quite a bit. From a kind of geeky technical standpoint, the thing I've enjoyed the most is thinking about how virtualization itself can change the way that traditional security has worked, and really embedding that into some of these offerings. I do often admit that virtualization screwed up a lot of things for a lot of people. It used to be that you knew where something ran, and it was a one-to-one correspondence, and you could plan for that. But in getting to this automation, this efficiency, we've made it where different workloads can run and be moved around. And you've also made it where multiple things can, of course, be on a single piece of hardware. This, in turn, has put a lot of pressure on the traditional world of statically placing firewalls around or really making sure that you can plan for things where you have very set policies around that. But what we found is that virtualization has given this really unique vantage point where you can see every network packet, every disk write, everything going on. And thus, we've been able to open up a number of APIs and allow a lot of security vendors to add their own products directly into this layer. And it has a lot of things you might not immediately recognize there. For instance, you can do it in a virtualization layer, which means you don't necessarily need agents in the virtual machines. And agents, for those of you that work with them, you know that it's hard to keep them up to date and working effectively. Another thing that's interesting is that if you really get into the security space, the age-old problem is how do you get the right context for different sorts of security solutions? So if I'm a firewall vendor, my dream is to understand what applications and processes are running as a packet comes in or out of the system. And likewise, if I'm actually inside a machine and I'm doing virus detection, it'd sure be nice who's trying to talk to me and who might have sent something into the system. So as you really can pull these things together, I think you can ultimately get better security solutions coming out of it. And that's going to be core to people really adopting these technologies all the way to the top. Now, I wanted to just close with a couple of customer cases because that's why you're all here, and this is something that I enjoy the most. One very fun thing about being at VMware is that the technology applies literally across the world and at different companies of different sizes. It's very fun to be in a horizontal sort of product area. But I thought I'd give you just 3 examples of companies that had done really interesting things that I've seen as of late. So if anyone's into motorcycles, you probably know about Ducati. They're an Italian company. But what's been really interesting for me is that they're a mid-sized company, and as little as about 2 years ago, they were 0% virtualized. And of course, our Italian team went in and talked with them to understand what could be done. Talked not just about technology, but very specifically about what you might need to do organizationally or culturally to break down what might have been silos and get people working together. But what's amazing to me is they've gone very quickly up to 98% virtualized on this. And what's more important is for the business transformation that followed this, they are, as you can imagine, they're always competing with the Japanese motorcycle makers. They've been able to have IT become more of a competitive weapon as they're able to satisfy more demands from the business, put up new marketing programs, respond to new employee needs, and really they're using that as a weapon to compete with companies much larger than themselves. So that one's been very fun to watch. The other one I wanted to spend a little time on, though, is in the healthcare space, and this is obviously something important for a number of different reasons. But one thing I've really realized about this notion of the Windows virtualization is that so many places do expect that a device is actually what you're trying to deliver an application to. And in reality, what we really care about is not devices, but about people. And so the notion has rolled out not just at Johns Hopkins, but at a number of different healthcare organizations, this notion of a follow me desktop, which essentially means wherever I am on whatever device, I should be able to get access to exactly my applications and data. So the way this manifests itself is that, especially for the nurses and doctors that do a lot of patient interaction, they need to be out there meeting with the patient, of course. But what they can do now, for instance, is take one of these tablets. And I always laugh because they say it fits exactly in that white pocket that they've had all along for clipboards. It fits perfectly. And now instead of just talking about them, then going back to their office and coming back, they're able to show rich MRI images right there, or they're able to talk about prescription interactions right as they're on the fly. And so this is a case where not only has it helped them satisfy many of the privacy laws and things around HIPAA, but it also lets them give ultimately a better patient-doctor experience, which is really what this should be all about. There's another interesting thing that I'm seeing in the healthcare industry that's also a little non-intuitive, but I've seen this out of HCA, certainly around Johns Hopkins in a new partnership. A lot of times these individual organizations are getting very good at solving their own IT problems. And in many cases now, they're actually spinning out their own IT department, or at least allowing their IT department to offer up services to other hospital systems. And this becomes very interesting. When you're able to serve, you've done a good job on your own, you might be able to reach out to others in your industry that have common policies or common complaints or common needs. It really turns IT literally into a business, not just a cost center. And then the last one I want to talk about is one of my favorite, which is a customer that we had recently on stage, Revlon. So I think you all know Revlon very well as a company in the cosmetics business. 70 years old, as you can imagine, 70 years of IT, maybe 50 of IT, a very, very complex set of systems in 100 different countries. So this group got very, very aggressive on moving forward towards this cloud model. And this is where so much of the work around culture and organization comes into play, something we can talk about if you like. But really making this a top-down imperative that they're going to get to this world that is virtualized and then moving towards more of the self-service aspects of cloud computing. The killer thing for me is a couple of the notes that you see up there. The first one is that they have 15,000 automated moves per month. What this really translates into, moves mean a lot of different things. It's how they provisioned or how they actually move things around during maintenance. This was all being done automatically, which effectively means these are 15,000 service tickets that weren't filed with IT, which in turn means they can respond to the ones that really are directly interacting and getting a better experience back to the customers. From a business transformation standpoint, the 300% increase in throughput, this is the thing that everyone in IT knows about, that long list of projects that you have that are waiting for your attention, and you have to go through a pretty painful triage process with business units. They're literally able to get through 3 times as many of those projects in any given month than they could in the past after they've moved to this more agile model. And then the other part that I like quite a bit, they have obviously manufacturing plants all over the world. They had put in this solution in place in Venezuela where they unfortunately had a fire. And literally within 2 hours, they were able to bring up that entire IT environment from that production unit into another country and get going very quickly. And then last, but really the bottom line in the way that Revlon talked about it so much is that IT actually returned budget ultimately to the business. And they literally took $70 million that were previously going to IT costs and turned it directly into advertisements for their cosmetics. And that is really about helping the business in the end. So I just love this case on so many cases. It really is talking about moving faster on projects. It's about how you can have better levels of availability. And ultimately, it's about returning to the business either in speed or in this case, in the number of projects that you can get through. So I love talking about these, lots of other stories that we could go into if we have a bit more time. But before I wrapped up on the question side, I didn't want to just say one more time, I think it's both an exciting time right now, but it's also a very tricky time to be dealing with things. Again, there's transformation on the infrastructure side, and it's being compounded by expectation changes. Really, people who are not going to come into your business and work as people in the world of a single desktop. And so how you deal with those is a trick for everybody, and I think that's really what we're trying to solve here together.